All right. My why, the reason that I believe that I exist on this planet, is to help others to continuously innovate so that they can make a massive impact in their own lives and the lives of those people around them. My career went from software development, business intelligence, data warehousing, geeky kind of stuff behind the keyboard kind of things, to product management, then moved into HR, university recruiting, leadership development, all over the place. But that amazing journey that I had personally wasn't because I was smart or because I was special. It was actually because I was applying the things that you're hearing about today and some of the things that I'm going to talk about this morning. So I know that if you apply these things anywhere in your life, in your personal life or in your work life, that you can also make a huge impact on the world. And I know that's why all of us are here. I'm a little bit confused, though, because I'm sure, well, actually, let me ask a quick question. So how many of you are part of a large organization? Hundreds of employees or bigger, thousands, hundreds? Great, okay, cool. So inside large organizations, we have this constant pressure to innovate, right? Innovate, innovate, innovate. How do we continue to innovate? How do we grow? How do we move forward? But the problem is that we never take the time to define what innovation actually is, right? Is innovation the invention of a new flying car? Is innovation the change of a government policy? Is innovation the change to an existing process for our employees inside the organization? What is it? It's all of those things, right? And it could be any of them, but yet we talk about it as if all of those things are exactly the same, but they're extremely different. And so I think there's just significant confusion around this that causes massive problems inside the organization. Sorry, I lost my, trying to fix my, there we go. Now I can see my timer, I know how much time I have. So we've got to get to the point where we've got a common understanding of what innovation actually is. So I'm going to try something a little bit bold here. This is the last time that I'm going to say the word innovation. And you can buzz me if I say the word innovation through the rest of the presentation, because I want to make sure that we're talking the same language and moving forward well. So what the real problem is growth, right? How do we create growth in our companies? If I've got something that I'm working on that can be implemented in the next year or two, it's a short time horizon. From that new thing, I can create impact or I can create growth, and there's very little uncertainty in it, right? If I move a little further out and I'm trying to figure out how to drive some sort of impact or some sort of growth 3, 4, 5 years out, I've got more uncertainty, and the further I go, I've got even more than that. And if you think about the natural S-curve of any product or service, at some point in time, it's going to decline and it's going to die. And we're going to continue to try to create new growth out of that opportunity. But the natural separation between those two things creates more and more uncertainty. So what I would propose is that what we're talking about is how do we navigate through uncertainty? How do we learn? How do we figure out how to take something where we have uncertainty, learn what's going to work, convert it into certainty, and then go and execute that, which is what large organizations are already good at. We do it day in and day out. So this happens across, damn, I can't use this thing properly today. My fault. This happens all across the entire organization. And you'll hear in lean startup circles and in human-centered design and transformation type situations, you'll hear that as an organization, we need to balance both execution and search, right? The reason that the organization got big and got successful because you learned what worked and then started executing effectively to grow a business at scale. On the other side, when we don't know what we're doing yet, we need to apply the principles of search. And so a lot of the things that you as service designers and as design professionals apply on a daily basis are very squarely on that search side. But the goal is ultimately that those things become real, actually become implemented and become used by the end customers so that they create the impact so that it can be executed, and that's where the growth is going to come from. So this is not one or the other. I'm not only searching or I'm only executing. Depending on what I'm working on, there's some amount of certainty there where I need to execute, and there's another amount of uncertainty where I need to learn and need to apply these principles. As core principles that I think any transformation program for a large organization needs to contain are empathy, experimentation, and evidence. You've already heard a lot about empathy this morning. This is understanding your customers deeply, connecting with them at an emotional level, really walking a mile in their shoes, literally, so that you can understand how to solve the problems for them. But what our customers say and what our customers do are almost never the same thing. And so we've got to run behavioral experiments to separate what people say from what people do and actually test real behaviors, show that the thing that we just created is really going to create the value and create the impact that we were hoping that it would. And then lastly, we need to use the evidence, the data, and the insights from those experiments and from the empathy work to make decisions about where to go with this product or with this service. The inside it happens in every organization, but there's an acronym that I love, which is called the Hippo. Have you heard about this? The highest paid person's opinion. That's how the decisions are made if you don't have evidence to be able to support those decisions. So we want to get to the point where it doesn't matter how much you're paid, that the evidence based on the customer's behavior and what you learn from the customer is what's made to used to make decisions going forward rather than just whatever our opinion says. So what I'd like to talk to you about primarily this morning, now that we've laid some foundational components, is how can you transform your organization? How can you get to the point where you have an organization that can operate effectively in both of those modes of being, right? The ways of search, leading, working that way, making decisions look very different than the way that you lead and execute on the other side. And so I'm going to break this down into 10 jobs for transforming your company. I know 10 probably sounds really easy. This is a multi 5-10 year journey to transform the culture of an organization. But this should give you a solid starting point to get rolling. So job number 1 is find your champions. You're probably some of those people already. That care about your organization and see the need for your organization to be different. But there's also, design thinking folks, lean startup folks, maybe there's entrepreneurs or ex-entrepreneurs in your company. Find those people at the low ranks, at the medium ranks, at the high ranks, all throughout the company. Find those individuals. Those are the early adopters that you want to try to attract to this change and start driving impact throughout your organization. Number 2 is to define your entrepreneurial spirit. So you need to make whatever this change program is your own. You can't just copy and paste what works in other organizations. It's got to be made your own. So at General Electric, they called the program Fast Works. At Intuit, we called it Design for Delight. At American Family Insurance, they call it Ignite. I don't care what you call it, but I hope that it's based on those principles that I talked about earlier, the empathy, experiments, and evidence. But getting down to what are the behaviors that we expect of our employees throughout the organization that show that they're exhibiting this entrepreneurial spirit, that they're behaving like owners, that they're trying to drive massive impact inside the organization. We need to know what that looks like and be able to paint a really clear picture of that situation for all employees. Job number 3 is to find some areas where you can drive impact as early as possible. So find some projects that already exist in the organization that have some level of uncertainty that you can go and drive some impact on. So you're going to take this new engine of empathy, experiments, and evidence to these projects and help drive business impact, put some points on the board. when I was at Intuit, I launched a program inside the company called 100 Startups in 100 Days. The idea was that myself and a couple of the innovation catalysts from Intuit would travel to 10 different Intuit sites, and we'd help launch 10 startups at each of those different sites. Over the course of a summer where my wife almost divorced me, we hit 82 startups in 100 days. That program drove hundreds of millions of dollars in business. Oh, I am still there. I thought I lost the audio. Hundreds of millions of dollars of business impact, drove net promoter scores for multiple products up, and then boosted employee engagement scores by about 7% across the company. We went to local site leadership, we went to different town halls, we posted flyers up on the walls, we put announcements on the different television screens all around the company, emailed the internal groups of people that have, oh, damn, I can't use that word. Well, it's an innovation group, so. Anyway, the idea is, though, that you need to look all over the place to try to source and find these ideas. They're not going to, they may not present themselves right away. We had teams that were working on new products and services. We had teams that were looking at things like making our existing customer service processes more effective. We had teams that were looking at things like making our HR training programs more effective. So all across the board, any type of project that has uncertainty that you can use to drive impact in the company early on. Job number, what am I at? 4. Job 4 is to up leadership's game. So I commented on it a little bit, but the way that leaders lead in uncertainty needs to look very different than the way that they lead when you have certainty and when you can just execute. So it's mentoring versus managing, right? I need to behave more like a really good venture capitalist and be supportive of the team, create an environment of safety and trust so that they can really be bold and push the boundaries on trying new things. And so as a leader, it looks very different than a team that's executing a process where we've done this 100 times, and I need to hold them accountable to the budget and the timeline and these other pieces, right? It's very different. And so the leaders need to be literally walking the walk. So a good example of this, the 100 Startups in 100 Days program that I was talking about from Intuit, the third one of these that I ran, I had seen our CEO in a town hall meeting basically talking about that he had just read the Lean Startup book and he was excited about it and these kinds of things. And so I sent him an email and I said, hey, we're doing these Lean Startup workshops all over the company. I'd love if you'd come and be a judge at one of the events. Within 5 minutes, I had a response back. He said, yeah, I've got a board meeting that day, but I think it might go short. If it goes short, then I'll be there and I'll be a judge at your event. He showed up. He was there, the teams were super excited, and he was extremely supportive. After that, he came back and did the kickoff for a couple of other ones. I should have included it actually, I've got photos of him and the founder of the company. This is a $4 billion company with 10,000 employees. The founder and the CEO mentoring teams that are running experiments, literally like by a design thinking poster, pointing at the poster, asking the teams about the experiments that they're running and what's happening in those cases. That's walking the walk, right? Leaders that are actually out with customers, learning from those customers, observing customers, internalizing those things. That's what's needed in this world. It's not just talking about it and putting some money into it. It's literally, it's doing and applying these things. Job 5 is understanding the why. You need to understand why it's important for your organization to transform, and you need to be able to articulate that vision across the organization. This is beginnings of starting to put together a communication plan for the transformation program. This is making sure that the vision for where you're headed is aligned with your corporate values. It shouldn't feel like this is separate. And in fact, we find with many different organizations that you can actually take the company values and break them into how does this value show up when I'm executing, and how does this value show up when I'm searching? And then oftentimes they'll show up a little bit differently, and you need to be able to honor the fact that they will be a little bit different and should be, that it's okay for that to occur. Job number 6, we're going to start creating a roadmap. We're going to try to predict the future about how this thing is going to go, which we know will likely be wrong, but creating a 2 or a 3 year roadmap, again, back to creating that excitement and the vision for where you're headed as an organization, being able to articulate where you believe you're headed, and getting people on board for that. You'll want to look at this point for, you're probably starting to see some excitement from parts of the business about the change in their part of the organization. And so those will be some of the organizations that'll be the first that you'll want to focus on from a transformation perspective. Going where you're loved, seeing where you're already having people asking for help and those kinds of things, those are some of the first areas to focus on and then continue to scale up. One of the tendencies that we have inside of large organizations is to build things as one size fits all. This program has to be exactly the same for every business unit, every department, every area of the company, and that's simply not true. We have different situations, different subcultures of the company, these kinds of things, and so you can't do this as a one-size-fits-all program. It's got to be completely tailored for each of those different areas. So figuring out how you can start by helping a struggling business unit or a project that's really high on the radar, that's had a really tough time being successful, be able to dive in there and drive impact as a starting point, and then continue to scale up as you see success. Invite the support functions to the party. So your HR, your finance, your IT, those other kinds of groups. I think most of you probably already know that you need these organizations to not only enable your ability to get out with customers and your ability to experiment and move quickly, but getting these functional areas of the business to also behave like product and service teams, right? One of the biggest impacts that I was able to have when I was at Intuit was specifically on the university recruiting program. Reimagining how that university recruiting program functioned inside the organization. I was hired as a product manager inside HR. I was one of the first product managers there, and it was this way of thinking, right? Applying this. You as service designers probably see this all the time. How do you think about all of those functional opportunities where everybody in the company has a customer, just the functional teams, it happens to be other employees inside the company, which is nice because it's easy to find them and experiment with them. So getting those support functions into the party. I keep pressing the wrong button. There we go. Job number 8 is accelerate. So at this point in the process, well, maybe not process, but at this point in the journey, you're starting to see lots of impact happening in the organization, probably running different accelerator programs in other parts of the company. You're starting to see pull from different parts of the organization saying, hey, this new way of working is working really well over there. I'd like some of that in my part of the business as well. You're probably starting to see different investment boards and some initial signs of diversified portfolio management occurring. Should see some acceleration of what's happening inside the organization. In product land, this is kind of the beginnings of you seeing product market fit for this transformation inside your organization. It's actually working. People are believing that this is not the flavor of the month, and not just you pushing this through the organization, but starting to have some pull in the organization. Number 9, we're starting to hit at the C level now, and when we get to this point, we actually see, instead of having different investment boards for the new further out horizon projects and projects with uncertainty, we start to see those boards become unified and start seeing the organization balance the portfolio of search work versus execute work together instead of separately. We start allocating resources across the organization using these components. One of our customers, ING Bank in the Netherlands, the Chief Innovation Officer declared a few months ago that he expected 50% of his employees to be working this way by the year 2020. Right? That's extremely bold. That's changing, requires changing the structure of the organization, requires driving significant impact. And that's I think what happens when you start taking these principles and really getting them into the DNA of how the organization works, right? It shouldn't be, are we working on something with uncertainty or are we working on something with certainty? It should be, this is my way of working and I can shift back and forth between these ways of working as needed. In the early days, it might feel like this is extra work, but on the long term, we want to integrate this into the processes and the ways of doing business so that we drive impact consistently. Here's the kind of crazy one. So I talked a bit about ING's bold challenge around 50% of employees working this way by 2020. The fact of the matter is that the culture of your company actually comes out of the structure of your company. And so an organization that's designed for the industrial age, where you've got silos and you've got rules of engagement between these different departments and different teams, and here's a form that you've got to fill out to be able to get this team to be able to do work for you, even though you're in the same company. These kinds of things are actually what causes the cultural issues and causes people not to be able to collaborate as effectively as we'd like, and not actually create the culture of the company that we desire. It's the cause that it's one of the causes for the organization being slow. And so at this point, we want to see new structures and the culture emerge from those structures. And we get a little, I don't know, a little new agey here, I guess. But this is what needs to happen in order for these changes to be permanent. If the structure of the organization stays the same and the culture of the organization stays the same, then the individual's desire to work this way doesn't matter, because the gravity of the rest of the company just drags you right back to the old way of working, and you can't make the kind of change that you're after. So my company moves the needle. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of really big organizations around the globe. So if you're some of the first people in your organization that are trying to drive this kind of change in your company, you're not alone. There are a lot of organizations that are going through this and really desire to make this kind of transformation as well. My company really stems exactly from what I talked about at the beginning of my why, which is, how do we empower these other organizations to transform themselves? So we do things like setting up sprints and the accelerator programs that I talked about, and certifying coaches inside the company, all with the goal of empowering that organization to be able to transform themselves. And I think that is not intended as a sales pitch, but to tell you that as you're trying to transform your organization, the way that you make these things sticky is that it's got to be your own. You have to be empowered to do it yourselves. And so just bringing in external vendors and those kinds of things to do the work on your behalf won't create the kind of change that you're after. And so you've got to be able to own it, and you've got to be able to grow these things from inside. All right, awesome. We are out of time. Thank you so much.